Ok, ele vai fechar a porta.
Boa noite a todos e todas. Hoje o programa de pós-graduação em Educação, Teoria e Prática da Universidade Federal do Paraná, por meio da disciplina Docência e Pesquisa, tem a alegria de receber um visitante muito especial, o professor IRA SHOR, grande parceiro do professor Paulo Freire, autor da obra Medo, ousadia e de outras inúmeras obras, um defensor da educação libertadora. Para recebê-lo, convidamos o nosso coordenador, professor Ricardo Antunes de Sá, para que possa fazer as boas-vindas e a apresentação do nosso convidado especial. Professor Ricardo.
Muito obrigado, professor Maurício. Boa noite a todas, boa noite a todos, sejam bem-vindos a esse evento organizado pelo nosso amigo, nosso colega, professor Maurício. Formação docente e emancipatória, uma roda de conversa com IRA SHOR, professor emérito da City University Graduate Center de Nova York. O professor doutor IRA SHOR, da City University of New York Graduate Center, PhD, programa em inglês, e no Departamento de Inglês do College of Staten Island. IRA SHOR tem se dedicado ao ensino de alunos da graduação e pós-graduação na perspectiva da educação crítica. É autor de 9 livros, dentre os quais 3 focalizam o pensamento e a prática de Paulo Freire. O trabalho de SHOR com Freire teve início em 1980 e se estendeu até o falecimento do Paulo Freire em 1997. SHOR e Freire são coautores do primeiro livro falado de Paulo Freire, intitulado no Brasil, aspas, Medo e ousadia, o cotidiano do professor, fecha aspas. Nessa produção, os autores discutem, com destaque, a questão do conhecimento, do diálogo e dos fundamentos da educação libertadora, em imbricação com a formação dos professores e a importância da inserção político-pedagógica dos educadores dentro e fora da escola. O livro de SHOR, Critical Teaching and Everyday Life, ainda sem tradução brasileira, foi a primeira obra integralmente destinada ao tratamento da pedagogia crítica de Freire, no contexto norte-americano. Professor SHOR, welcome to our professional master in education and education sector at the Federal University of Paraná. We appreciate your academic contributions this spring night in Curitiba. Thank you so much. Health and peace. Welcome.
Thank you.
Professor Aya,
Yes.
ele está muito feliz de estar aqui. Professor Aya and Professor Ricardo said that
I understood most of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
That
Okay.
much I understand, yes. So what happens, what do we do now? What happens next?
Okay, so the Professor Mauricio will turn on the video. He will speak a little bit and then he'll put the video on.
Okay. Can you,
Okay?
Stephanie, please say in Portuguese how honored and happy I am to be invited and joining you tonight.
Ok. O professor Aira disse que ele está muito feliz de estar aqui, de ter sido convidado para estar aqui conosco nessa noite.
Ok. Então, antes da gente rodar o vídeo que o professor Aira preparou para nós como contexto de abertura, eu vou chamar a Andréia, mestranda do programa, para que ela possa contextualizar um pouco, como é que a gente chega ao professor Aira, dentro da disciplina. Nós que estávamos discutindo várias obras de Freire e dentro dos desafios, a obra de Freire é desafiadora, Um dos desafios a Andréia assumiu e eu queria que ela contasse um pouquinho, né, para a gente introduzir, situar como é que a gente chega ao professor Aira. Andréia,
Okay,
por favor.
Professor Ira, now Andrea will tell us how she met you. Okay, she will tell us how she met you.
Thank you.
Okay?
Olá a todas e a todos, boa noite. Então, quando nós iniciamos a disciplina de docência e pesquisa com o professor Maurício Fagundes, nós estudamos e revisitamos as obras de Paulo Freire, entre elas Medo e Ousadia, como já foi mencionado anteriormente aqui, e eu tive a iniciativa de procurá-lo no Facebook, tomei a liberdade de convidá-lo a prestigiar uma de nossas aulas, né? E foi grata a minha surpresa por encontrar na generosidade do professor Aira um típico comportamento freiriano em nos receber e tão prontamente estar conosco hoje, nos possibilitar essa roda de conversa. Então, eu e os mestrandos da turma de 2020 estamos felizes e agradecemos por essa oportunidade, professor Aira.
And Professor Ira, she's so glad to meet you, and she wants to thank you for being here and be with us. She wants to thank you.
Thank you.
Bem, então indo para a apresentação, né, do vídeo, eu quero deixar registrado, né, vários agradecimentos aqui. Talvez até não seja necessário, Stephanie, a tradução, né, mas é para registro nosso aqui, que eu acho que é importante. Eu quero, né, inicialmente, agradecer a coordenação do programa, na pessoa do professor Ricardo, da professora Etienne, ao Aloysio, né, nosso colega, que além de seus afazeres acadêmicos, construiu suporte técnico e estético, né, para esse nosso encontro, aos nossos intérpretes de Libras, Claudinei e Peterson, cumprimentar a turma de mestrado 2020 pela ousadia nessa proposição, agradecer a Marina, minha filha, a Stephanie, pela ajuda na tradução simultânea, a Márcia, André e Matheus, mestrando que compuseram a comissão de organização desse momento. E, evidentemente, agradecer a todas as pessoas que participam conosco, né, via YouTube, neste momento. Bem, então, nessa sequência a seguir, passamos ao vídeo e logo após, então, começamos a roda de conversa. Inicialmente, essa roda de conversa tem algumas questões já levantadas pelos mestrandos, mas fica também aberto às pessoas que estão participando via YouTube, pelo chat. Então, pode encaminhar, o professor Aira se colocou à disposição daquelas questões que ele não puder responder neste momento, né? A gente encaminha via e-mail, né? Ele disponibilizou o e-mail para que pudesse ser enviado, que ele faz questão de responder, né, a todos os questionamentos. Aloysio, podemos passar os vídeos.
Also sobriety, that not to drink too much and do not drink on the job or come to work drunk or hungover. And in addition, it was also to teach them to be responsible, to respect the owner, to respect the boss, and to put in an honest day's labor. So there was a lot of behavior development or behavior modification that was typically accompanying literacy programs. Now, this had gone on in other countries as well, that literacy was to assimilate what Michel Foucault called docile bodies, or that the mass of society should be compliant with the status quo and listen to the rules and fit in and accommodate and become productive. So Paulo undertook that job, and he thought it was paternalistic for any agency to begin to lecture and arrange working folks as docile bodies. So it was a long lesson for him in the life of how adult workers lived, and also what their family situations were like. To make it brief, after 10 years, he began to gradually discover that as an educator, he would need to learn how ordinary people lived and how they communicated, how they spoke, what were their problems, what were their conditions, what were their dreams and aspirations, what were their families like, and how did they get housed, what kind of homes did they live in. Before he could become a teacher, he had to first become a student of the working class that he was working on. That's what he began to learn in those 10 years, and eventually he learned that he needed a new pedagogy, a new model of teaching and learning to be able to reach the working class among the poor. So Paulo left then and went to the University of Recife, where he did a doctoral study of education, further developed what became known as the Paulo Freire method. Now, what I'd like to offer to you folks is this idea that suppose we describe education as basically divided into three forms. We have formal education, non-formal education, and informal education. Formal education is what most of us educators are involved in. That is, it's in a school, it's in a college, it's in a classroom, and it's in an institution that's funded by the state. And that we have a lot of bureaucracy to deal with. There's a lot of institutional machinery. We get the list of the students who are in our class in advance. And then we have to apply a pedagogy, a curriculum that's usually mandated from a central authority. We have to give midterm grades and end-term grades. We have to follow a syllabus, and then we have to identify who is to pass and move on to the next grade and who is not. And this is typical of formal education that's very common all around the world. When a state establishes or regulates a mass education system, it becomes what we call formal education, because the forms are so prescribed from the top down and so regulated by different rules. Now, we have other forms of education. We have a form of education called non-formal education. And these are all kinds of learning activities that are organized, but might take place in a trade union who organizes apprentice classes for young people, or it might take place in a community organization or in church basement, or it might take place as part of political movements or political parties who offer seminars. And this is called non-formal because it may come from an organization, but it's not a formal educational organization, and it doesn't have the machinery of registration into a class and end-term grades based on the final exam, and it typically doesn't have a syllabus that goes on for 10 or 15 weeks and so on. So we call that non-formal because it's not regulated by the state, but it's offered inside a building, and it's offered by various experts, and it has a theme of some kind. Now, the third type of education we have in society is called informal education. And this is an enormous territory of learning. And it more or less begins from the moment that a child is born into a family. From the moment a child is born, the experience of being part of a family, of being raised inside a community, of having adults and others speak to you in the dialect and language of that community, of learning how table manners and learning what kind of food do we eat, and what do people here find funny? What is our sense of humor? What kind of music do we listen to? What kind of houses do we live in, and how do we furnish those houses? How do people understand friendship? And what do people do when they want to get someplace? How do they travel? Where are they likely to work? And what do people do in the streets when they meet each other? How do they talk to each other? Anyhow, this is the enormous territory of everyday experience, which is constantly socializing us and teaching us how to be a person inside the location, the class and the community, and the gender and the race that we are born into. So we have these three forms of education: informal, based in the community upbringing of a child; non-formal, based in various organizations in society offering seminars and apprenticeships and classes in basements; and then we have this enormous operation called formal education, which in every advanced society there is a very large school system that is very expensive to run, and that is in specialized buildings and run by a very large bureaucracy and so on. So I mentioned these three forms of education because it's important to know that Paulo, in the Industrial Social Services as Director of Education from 1947 to 1957, he was working in non-formal adult education. That is, he had a territory, and he had a lot of working families, and he had to develop programs after work or on weekends that did not give grades and did not require registration, that did not charge families for their enrollment, but these were programs that were attempting to develop the people who lived in that area, who were the workforce that the industrialists were very interested in developing into literate people. Now, Paulo then went on after he left that program to study at the University of Recife, and he continued to develop his method for non-formal adult education, adult literacy classes that were not part of a long-term syllabus or formal curriculum of a university. Now, this is different than what most of us do now. Most of us work inside formal institutions regulated by the state, and we are paid by as public servants of the state. And we also have to achieve certain credentials to qualify to be employed there. Then we're observed regularly to make sure we're doing a proficient job. Then we have to deliver a syllabus and give everyone a grade at the end and certify that a certain knowledge level has been. That's formal education. So what's happened in the last 50 or 60 years is that the origins of Paulo Freire's work in adult literacy as non-formal education has been assimilated or absorbed into many of us who work in formal education. And the great challenge to us is to figure out how do we know, how does it migrate? How does it move from adult illiterates to elementary school children who are in second grade or fifth grade, to high school students who are teenagers, to college students, which I have taught for 50 years? How do we then adapt the program for that? So we have to look at the foundation of what Paulo Freire based his program in, to start from there, to teach ourselves that this foundation, we're now going to take it and put it concretely in a different location, that we're going to move the site to formal education, but try to work with the same philosophy. So here was the philosophical starting point for Paulo Freire. It has to do with the word humanization. That this is the foundational starting point for how Paulo understood education in society and politics and power in school and society. To Paulo, he thought that the vocation, the task of all human beings was to become more fully human. And to be more fully human meant a certain thing to Paulo. That humanization meant that we were going to increase our dignity. We're going to be increasing the respect with which we treated others and others treated us. That we're going to constantly be learning more and capable of doing more. And that we were going to have a more executive authority, more knowledge that enabled us to become what he called subjects of history, not objects. Subjects meant that we had plans and intentions, and we understood that we needed to take part in the making of society, or else society would be made for us by somebody else. Now, we understood that the society, the current society in Brazil and pretty much everywhere else, was dehumanizing. And it was not only dehumanizing to the masses of folks who had to live in cruel poverty and had to deny themselves and their children basic needs, and who also were treated with great violence and abuse by the police, and who lived in very small houses and apartments without proper plumbing, and who wore tattered clothes. Not only was this condition of life dehumanizing for the 20 million people who were illiterate in Brazil when Paulo began work in the 1950s, but it was also dehumanizing for all those who enforced that society on the rest of us. That dehumanization happened from top to bottom. That those in power, or what Paulo used to say, the power now in power, who benefited materially by denying equality and prosperity to the great mass of society, who captured most of the wealth of society and had most of the power, that to treat other human beings this way en masse was dehumanizing for them. And he also understood that all of us who were the target of these kind of policies were also not allowed to become more fully human. So his task was to figure out what kind of pedagogy, what kind of curriculum would address people as individuals who were in process of becoming more human and gaining more power, and who were also going to relieve the elite of their own dehumanization by our achievement of authority, of education. So this was the foundational belief. So all of us who work in formal education, we teach the same people that Paulo taught in informal education. But we teach most of their children in public schools, and we teach them in college, and most of my students have been working class and lower middle class. And so now I take that belief with me into the classroom and want to see how do his methods help me do that in this other setting. Can I continue? These literacy lessons were the starting point, and what made them especially powerful and politically consequential in Brazil at that time is that the Brazilian Constitution of 1932 did not allow illiterates to vote. So we had 20 million illiterates in Brazil at that time, around 1960, and they were mostly poor, working class, and so on, and they were not allowed to vote. So the electorate in Brazil was skewed towards more affluent Brazilians, and the poor and the working class were written out of the franchise, the ability to vote. Now, at the end of 40 hours of instruction, Paulo Freire's students in these inexpensive literacy classes had control of basic reading and writing and could then qualify to vote. So the president of Brazil at that time, João Goulart, was a liberal president, attended the graduation class in a very famous setting in the town of Angicos in the northeast of Brazil, where the first literacy class graduated from the first showcase of this literacy class was offered. The president brought his entire cabinet, and he watched the students who had been a few months earlier illiterate suddenly able to read and write, and addressed the president that they are no longer part of the masses, but now we are people and we have the right to vote and determine our future. So the liberal president Goulart was very impressed by this and invited Freire to direct the national literacy campaign. And he did that for the next year, 63 to 64. And what happened was that he was on the verge of opening 20,000 literacy circles and hoping to graduate 5 million new voters for the national election campaign in 1965. The elite that had been governing Brazil by legally excluding all the poor and working class from voting were very alarmed at this, and so they launched a coup on March 31st, 1964, that overthrew the government of Goulart, forced him out of the country, and arrested Paulo Freire. What I'd like folks to understand is this, that we often talk about empowering education, and that Paulo insists that education is politics. All education, all pedagogies are political. And we constantly discuss, well, what are the political impacts of our teaching? What's important to know is at that moment in Brazil, every time a student graduated from a Freirean literacy class, they immediately qualified to become a voter. And an enormous block of excluded poor and working class students were certainly going to become able to vote and vote for the political parties that represented their interests. And it would pull Brazilian society in a very strong democratic direction because of the newly enfranchised voters. That led to the coup, and it was not until the opening, the apertura in 1980 and so on, when a new constitution went into effect in 1988 in Brazil, when illiterates were allowed to vote. Now here's the difference. The Constitution of 1988 says illiterates may vote. Everybody else must vote. So all the illiterates can choose to vote or not, and literacy is not a requirement for voting. But neither are the literacy required to vote. The illiterate required to vote. But all the others who are already literate are obliged to vote. So there was still a distinction made, and that's as far as the democratic opening could go in the 1980s. So I've been talking for a long time, and I wanted to give a little foundation to what Paulo Freire had in mind when he invented this method and brought this philosophy to school and society. And I hope that folks read more and that we can have a good exchange about these issues. Thank you. So Paulo developed a method which was based in the language and conditions of the students in this classroom. He thought that we teachers had to first become students of our students and learn all the material conditions of their lives before we were qualified to develop a curriculum situated in the terms of their life that would be familiar and legible to them, and also would signal to them that they counted and there was something worth working on here. So Paulo had trained his literacy teams to go into the neighborhoods, the communities of the students, and to study the students. He would study all the things I mentioned before: their food, their labor, how did they work, how did they handle money, what kind of homes did they live in, what kind of clothes did they wear, what happened in the family, how did the parents treat their children, how were the police treating them when they had to get somewhere, how did they go, and so on. And they did more or less like ethnographic research among the students in the communities they were teaching for. Out of that, they developed what were called the generative words, or words that were very commonly spoken and used, or signified important intersections of life in the community. And they brought in community co-developers to help them confirm that these words they were hearing were important in the community. How did the people in the community understand it? They then made those words the foundation of the literacy curriculum. They were called generative words. And there would be words like brick, tijolo, or they would be vota, vote, or they would be house, or they would be work, and, or they would be food. Sometimes it was rice, so on. And then that word had to satisfy a few things. First, it had to be an important word to the community students. Secondly, it had to have a syllabic structure that could be broken down, preferably a trisyllabic structure. And then it could be introduced through an illustration. I'll show you the original illustration, if I can find that book. Here. Here it is. Okay. So Paulo hired an artist to draw slides. This is the first slide that his literacy team used, and the first theme that he introduced into the literacy class was the anthropological nature of culture, or the difference between nature and culture, and how human beings have invented this tremendous power, this tremendous tool called culture, and that the illiterate students sitting in the class with Paulo may have been the most disrespected and the lowest paid people in society, but they were also possessors of this great human power called culture. And it was culture. They used culture to make the world every day that they lived in. So these 10 slides, as you can see, they go on from one to the next. These slides were projected onto a whitewashed wall, and because the students were illiterate and could not read texts, they had to begin with slides or pictures that were meaningful to the students, and then to have a discussion led by the literacy team leader there in class about what did the students see, what did the slide mean, how did they understand it. And only after a long discussion of that reached the end of, and you can see the final slide in this, hang on one second, there it is. The final slide in this initial series was the literacy class itself, and you can see kind of a young Paulo Freire pictured in the background without his beard. He did not grow his beard until 1969 when he came to Boston in the United States, where he found it very cold. So for most of his early life, Paulo had no beard. And he's pictured here teaching a literacy class, and that literacy class is the latest act of culture by these illiterate students to gain the power of reading and writing, so as to transform themselves as culture makers with a greater power to remake the culture of their everyday life and their society. So it was based, this pedagogy was based in very legible pictures that began, because it was offered to illiterate adults. And they also learned that that they could make sense out of their reality, make organized sense, extended sense out of the society. They were experiencing their own ability to articulate.
Muito bom, very good. Na sequência, então, após esse vídeo, o professor Aira nos remete à obra do Freire, à essência, né, da obra freiriana, que são elementos caros ainda para o nosso processo de educação formal e, por vezes, distante. E nos provoca, então, a ir para a nossa terceira parte dessa nossa roda de conversa, né? E efetivamente dar início, então, a uma troca de de interrogações, né, que na verdade não necessariamente existem respostas fechadas, né? Freireanamente não existem respostas fechadas, mas a partir de seus princípios que o professor Aira nos traz aqui, né, resgata no vídeo, nos dá a possibilidade então de dialogar, de fazer um diálogo estreito com o professor Aira. E aí então convido a Stephanie para conduzir, né, esse momento agora da roda de conversa. Por favor, Stephanie.
Professor Ira, so we will start our sharing. It's a sharing circle, in which we will exchange experience, and we will talk a little bit about all those questions that you have been talking about before on the videos. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with the questions. We got the first question from Andrea, Sandra, and Adriana, and they work as teacher. Andrea works as a 6th grade teacher. Sandra works as a special education teacher, and Adriana works as a early childhood teacher. So the first question is, at the current government, there is a strong tendency about religious education and military education. So how to develop an education for liberation on this background?
Mm-hmm. Yes. See. Okay. I will speak in English, and then you please translate for our friend. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Very important in Paulo Freire's method is participation.
O que é muito importante no método freiriano, né, do Paulo Freire, é participação.
The illiterate adult.
Os adultos analfabetos. Sorry, professor.
That's right. The illiterate adult students were not lectured at.
Os adultos que são analfabetos.
Yes, Paulo Freire said that education suffers from narration sickness.
O Paulo Freire disse que educação ele vai trazer direção para esses adultos que não são alfabetizados.
The teacher is constantly narrating contents for the students to memorize.
O professor ele é constantemente limitado pelos conteúdos que os estudantes têm que memorizar.
Paulo Freire believed that all students had to be active learning subjects in the classroom.
O Paulo Freire ele acreditava que os estudantes tinham que ser ativos em relação aos conteúdos que eles tinham que aprender em sala de aula.
If not, all knowledge came from the teacher and was deposited in the passive minds of the students, and he called this the banking method of education.
Senão todo o conhecimento seria vindo do professor e depositado na mente dos estudantes, e isso ele chamava de educação bancária.
See. So now the question is about religious education and military education.
Então, essa pergunta é sobre educação religiosa, né, por parte da religião, e educação por parte, né, da educação militarizada.
There is great danger here that these subjects will be taught in a banking style of education.
Então, há uma grande tendência aqui desses conteúdos serem colocados, né, esse ensinamento ser colocado como uma educação bancária.
Religion has many doctrines that it wants to transfer to students.
A religião, ela tem a tendência muito grande de transferir o conhecimento para os estudantes. E tem muitos dogmas a serem transferidos, né, para os estudantes.
Military education has many histories of battles and wars, and many techniques of making war that it wants to transfer to the students also.
E a educação militarizada, ela tem a tendência a trazer conhecimentos que venham ser importantes para o ensino militar, ensino de guerra para os estudantes.
So, if we are forced by the state authorities, to teach religious education and military education,
então, se nós somos... Então, se nós somos forçados pelo Estado, pelo governo, né, a introduzir a educação religiosa e militarizada,
we must make it critical and participatory.
Nós devemos fazer uma educação crítica e participativa.
Yes. We have in America a method called teaching the conflicts.
Nos Estados Unidos, nós temos um método que se chama ensino de conflitos. Seria alguma coisa assim, ensino de conflitos.
Every religion in the world, every major religion in the world, has a left wing and a right wing.
Todas as religiões do mundo, elas têm um lado direito e esquerdo.
There are left-wing Catholics and right-wing Catholics.
Tem os certos ensinamentos católicos e errados ensinamentos católicos.
There are left-wing Jews and right-wing Jews.
Tem o lado judeu direito e o lado judeu esquerdo.
There are left-wing Protestants and right-wing Protestants.
Tem lado direito, né, do protestante e o lado esquerdo do protestante.
They do not agree on doctrine or on political issues.
Eles não concordam em doutrinas ou assuntos políticos.
If a conservative state forces us to teach religious education, sorry, Professor, can you repeat, please? Yes, if a conservative state forces us to teach a religious curriculum,
se o Estado força a gente a ensinar um currículo baseado na religião,
then we should teach the conflicts in each religion.
Nós temos que ensinar o conflito de cada religião, em cada religião.
How do left-wing Jews differ from right-wing Jews?
Como os judeus de direita são diferentes dos judeus de esquerda?
The same with Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims.
O mesmo com os católicos, protestantes e muçulmanos.
In the current election in the United States,
nas eleições agora que estão acontecendo nos Estados Unidos,
Catholics voted for both Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden. They did not agree, even though both were Catholic.
Os católicos, eles têm votado tanto pro Biden como pro Trump. Eles não concordam também. Eles também têm opiniões diferentes, mesmo ambos sendo católicos.
Some Jews voted for Mr. Trump, and other Jews voted for Mr. Biden.
Alguns judeus votaram no Trump e outros judeus votaram no Biden.
This is why we can say that we can teach the conflicts while still being honest to the religion.
Por isso que nós dizemos que nós temos que ensinar os conflitos inseridos em cada religião.
See? And we can bring in statistics, data, about how many Jews voted this way, how many Jews voted that way, how many Jews support this issue, say, of higher taxes for the rich, how many Jews support lower taxes. We can take any social issue and we can approach any religious community and discover a difference of opinion.
Nós poderíamos até fazer uma estatística sobre quantos judeus são a favor de baixar os impostos, quantos judeus são a favor de aumentar os impostos. Nós poderíamos fazer um estudo em cima dessas divergências de opiniões.
For example, in America, some Catholics support homosexual marriage and abortion, while other Catholics are opposed.
Por exemplo, nos Estados Unidos, nós podemos dizer que alguns católicos apoiam o casamento entre pessoas do mesmo sexo e o aborto, e outros católicos não apoiam, discordam.
In Brazil, there is a tradition of liberation theology. And Paulo discussed liberation church versus the traditional church as two different forms of the Catholic belief.
No Brasil, nós temos a religião tradicional e a religião mais liberal. O Paulo, ele discutia entre a religião católica tradicional e a religião católica liberal.
Now, about teaching military education.
E sobre ensinar numa perspectiva militarizada,
we can ask, what is the history of the military in Brazil? How has the military behaved in Brazil?
Nós temos que refletir, temos que pensar como foi a história, como tem sido a história da militar no Brasil, como ela vem sendo, como ela vem acontecendo no Brasil até hoje.
We are now asking that same question in America about our own military.
E nós temos nos perguntado temos nos feito a mesma questão nos Estados Unidos sobre a educação militarizada.
Our military was racist and segregated until 1948.
Como a educação, como a força militar vem sido racista e como ela segrega, tinha sido, né? Havia sido até 1986.
So there are critical issues, critical themes we can put for the curriculum in these two areas.
Há assuntos muito críticos que nós poderíamos colocar no currículo envolvendo essas áreas.
But most important.
Mas, o mais importante.
A school is not a church.
Escola não é igreja.
A school is not a barracks.
Escola não é quartel.
Military education and religious education do not belong in a public school.
Educação religiosa e educação militar não pertencem à escola pública.
This is the most important principle of a democratic society for educators to stand behind.
Essa é a coisa mais importante para uma educação democrática, para uma sociedade democrática entender sobre a educação.
And what Paulo Freire recommended, he called untested feasibility in English. Untested feasibility.
Untested visibility.
Yes. I don't know the Brazilian term. I'll explain it this way.
Okay.
We go to a situation and we say, what are the political forces in this location? So if we want to get something done, who will be for us and who will be against us?
I'm going to try to explain what you said, okay? O que o Paulo Freire dizia é que a gente tinha que saber quem estava oprimindo e ir às ruas saber quem estava no poder e como fazer isso.
And if there are liberation theology groups or progressive Catholics, perhaps they can become allies to keeping schools secular and not turning them into churches.
Tem alguns grupos liberais religiosos que eles têm permissão de administrar escolas seculares.
This happened in America recently.
Isso tem acontecido recentemente nos Estados Unidos.
In the state of Texas,
No Texas,
there is a group called
tem um grupo chamado
Pastors for Public Education.
Pastores para a Educação Pública.
They joined with non-religious teachers to protect the public schools from the budget being lost to private and religious schools.
Eles colocam professores que não são religiosos para tentar fingir que a escola não é uma escola religiosa, que é uma escola normal, uma escola secular.
Very important group, Pastors for Public Education in Texas.
É um grupo bem importante no estado do Texas, pastores para a educação pública.
Very conservative state.
O Texas é um estado bem conservador.
Yes. I will stop here and see if someone wants to make a comment or ask something about what I said. Can you please ask?
O professor Arya disse que ele vai parar para deixar um espaço se alguém quiser fazer algum comentário, alguém quiser falar alguma coisa a respeito do que ele acabou de dizer.
Stephanie, professora Aira, no chat, a Lilian pergunta o que seria o ensino do conflito.
Okay. And Professor Arya,
Yes.
on the chat, Lilian, she asked what would be... pode repetir, professor Maurício, por gentileza? O que seria?
O ensino de conflito.
Okay.
Que...
As a conflict teaching.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a teaching conflict?
Yes. For example, in
Por exemplo,
America now, there are groups that say minimum wage must be at least $15 an hour. Other groups, yes, go ahead, please say that.
Oh, sorry. Por exemplo, nos Estados Unidos tem alguns grupos que dizem que o salário mínimo deveria ser $50 a hora.
Other groups, especially business groups, say we cannot afford to pay $15 an hour.
Outros grupos, especialmente de empresários, dizem que eles não têm condições de pagar um salário de $50 a hora.
That wage will make us go out of business.
Oh, sorry, Professor.
Yes. The businessmen say $15 an hour will put us out of business.
Ok. Os empresários, eles dizem que $50 a hora, o salário mínimo, vai deixar eles falidos.
So, this is a very important conflict right now in America. The minimum wage.
Tá. Então, sorry, Professor.
Okay, say it. Okay.
Então, esse é um conflito bem atual, bem presente nos Estados Unidos neste momento, em uma dimensão menor, né?
44 million Americans work for less than that.
54 milhões de americanos trabalham por menos que isso, menos de $50 a hora.
So there is a conflict here in society. We bring the conflict into the classroom and ask the students to read the position of both sides.
Tem um conflito.
Yes.
Sorry. Há um conflito de posições nesse contexto. Então, a gente pega esse conflito, leva para dentro da sala de aula e pede para os estudantes lerem e analisarem esses dois pontos de vista, dos dois lados.
There will be essays to read as well as databases. I bring both into the classroom. statistics plus arguments in essays.
Ele leva para a sala de aula dados estatísticos e vários tipos de artigo a respeito desse tema, para que os estudantes tenham contato com esses argumentos e com esses dados estatísticos a respeito desse assunto.
And teaching the conflicts moves to a more Freirean critical pedagogy when we ask the students in class which conflicts should we study.
E a pedagogia freiriana, ela é colocada nesse tipo de educação, ensino de conflito, quando a gente pergunta para os estudantes em sala que tipo de conflito eles gostariam de analisar.
We ask the students to set the syllabus. What are the themes and topics we should study? Which conflicts in society matter most to them?
Nós perguntamos para os estudantes que tipo de conflito social seria mais importante para estudar, para analisar.
See. Yes. So does that answer the question of how to, an example of how to do it?
Yeah. Ele quer saber se essa resposta, esse exemplo responde à pergunta que foi feita a ele. I think so, yeah, it was great.
Certamente sim, certamente sim.
Certainly, yes.
Any other questions?
Alguma outra pergunta, professor Maurício?
Eu acho que podemos dar sequência naquelas questões e à medida que ela for complementando as respostas que o professor Ara vai dando, eu puxo aqui do chat o que o pessoal está colocando, senão eu deixo as questões do chat mais ao final.
Okay. So we will keep going.
Okay,
Professor Ara, for the next question.
Okay.
In the second question is from the same group that I told you before.
Yes.
The three students, they made it together. And in 1986, you wrote a pedagogy for liberation that was titled as Medo e ousadia, o cotidiano do professor, in Portuguese. And 34 years after that, what kind of reflections can we do yet? So what has been changed and what do we need to change now?
Okay, very important question. Thank you. Very good question. I spent time, I made notes, and I wrote down 6 items I would like to share to you about what needs to be changed or what needs to be improved or expanded. Here's the first item. Will you please tell the folks?
Yeah, okay. O professor Ara, ele refletiu sobre essa questão e ele fez uma lista de 6 itens de coisas que precisam talvez serem mudadas ou coisas que precisam de algum tipo de transformação ou que sejam, talvez tenham que ser evitadas.
See. Item 1. We must discuss the internet, computers, virtual reality, and social media. This, in 1986, this was invisible. Can you please tell me?
Ok. O primeiro item, a gente tem que discutir sobre internet, realidade virtual, computadores, e todas as tecnologias que em 1986 eram invisíveis, não existiam.
See, many, we have computer scientists writing critically about the internet. What is its impact on society and on the ability of students to learn? So there is a literature now that we should discuss about critical pedagogy with computers.
Nós hoje em dia temos literatura referente à ciência da computação, com artigos críticos a respeito do assunto. Então, hoje em dia, nós temos material, né, temos livros que discutem a respeito dessas questões tecnológicas.
One of my former students works in this area.
Um dos meus estudantes, um dos meus alunos trabalha nessa área.
If any of our teachers are interested in reading her work, please email me. I think you have my email, and let me know. I will send you her email address to contact her. Her name is Erin Glass. That's my former student.
A aluna que o professor tem, que escreve, né, que tem materiais publicados a respeito desse assunto. Ela tem vários materiais e ele tem como disponibilizar o e-mail de contato dela para os professores que tenham interesse nesse assunto, nessa área, que possam, de repente, contactar o professor Aira e ele passaria, né, o contato dessa aluna.
Okay. Item 2, second item.
Segundo item.
Global warming.
Aquecimento global.
In 1986, this was very barely discussed. The first major announcement or declaration of global warming in the United States came in 1988, 2 years after the book. So for sure, we must discuss the problem of climate change and the warming of the atmosphere.
Em 1986, o aquecimento global era raramente discutido em algum tipo de reunião, algum tipo de congresso, porque o primeiro trabalho, a primeira discussão formal sobre o aquecimento global, ela aconteceu em 1988. Então, é um assunto que naquele tempo não era discutido, não tinha se falado a respeito na época.
I would propose that every public school should become a climate center with a weather station.
Weather station?
Yes,
Sorry.
To measure atmospheric pressure, temperature, wind velocity and direction, barometric pressure. That every school should have any equipment so that the students can practice measuring and studying every day the weather.
Ok. Ele acha que toda escola deveria ter uma estação do tempo. Deveria ter os equipamentos que medissem a pressão atmosférica, a qualidade do ar. É algo que ele acha que deveria existir nessas escolas.
Critical pedagogy would say this school asks students to test the water we drink in the school and the water we drink at home.
A pedagogia crítica, ela diz que esses estudantes deveriam testar a água que eles bebem na escola e a água que eles bebem nas suas casas.
Very important to young people here is the climate and the global warming. Here is the third item. We must catch up to the movements around racism and Black Lives Matter. That's item number 3. I have here Black Lives Matter. How does that become part of our curriculum?
Ok. No terceiro item, ele colocou aquele movimento, né? Vidas negras importam, né? Ele acha que é algo que deveria estar no currículo.
Conferences are now being held in America by critical teachers about Black Lives Matter and teaching against police violence and against white supremacy. At this moment, new books are coming out for teachers about this, as well as conferences right now.
Nos Estados Unidos, nesse momento, estão acontecendo várias conferências, vários movimentos relacionados ao movimentos antirracistas, e muitos livros, muitos materiais a respeito disso vão aparecer agora, estão sendo escritos nesse momento lá nos Estados Unidos. Contra o racismo e contra a violência policial em relação a toda essa questão do racismo e do poder, né, da questão do Black Power, né, no caso das pessoas que têm esse empoderamento contra o racismo.
Fourth item is what we call in America gender equity, the equality of the genders. That's
o quarto item seria a igualdade de gênero.
Much more is understood now and expected now about the treatment of women than 35, 40 years ago.
Muito mais agora é esperado, né, em relação ao tratamento em relação às mulheres e à postura em relação às mulheres do que há 34 anos atrás.
Many famous men and executives in business are sued in court because of their sexual abuse of female employees.
Muitos executivos famosos, homens poderosos, vão parar, né, nos tribunais por causa de acusações de abuso sexual no trabalho, assédio sexual também.
Here is the fifth item.
E agora o quinto item.
Immigration.
Imigração.
This is a very big conflict in America now.
Esse é um grande conflito nos Estados Unidos agora.
Also in Europe.
E também na Europa.
And so I tried to bring a unit on immigration into my writing classes to test how to update this theme for critical pedagogy. We did not discuss it in 1986.
Eu tento trazer esse tema para as minhas aulas hoje em dia, as minhas aulas de redação, esse tema sobre imigração, é coisa que ele não fazia em 1986, era algo que não estava tão evidente em 1986, sobre a imigração.
See, yes. The last item, number 6, has to do with the growing authoritarianism in schools and colleges.
Ok. E o último item é o número 6, é o sexto item, a respeito do crescimento da autoridade nas salas de aula.
Yeah.
Sorry, professor. I mean, do you mean government authority or teaching authority in class?
Austerity and authority and the use of standardized testing.
Ok. A respeito do uso de testes padronizados nos Estados Unidos, essa autoridade dos testes padronizados, que são testes que já vêm prontos, já vêm como se fosse do núcleo, esses standard tests, são testes padrões.
See.
Is that right?
See, yes.
Okay.
Those are the 6 items I would add if Paulo and I redid the book now.
Ok. Esse item número 6, que ele fala sobre o Paulo falaria, né, sobre isso. So, are you going to read the book now?
No,
part of that?
No, because since Paulo passed away, I will have to write the book with someone else.
Oh, okay. No. Sorry, I got it. Ok. Eu tinha entendido que ele falou que era de um livro que ele já havia escrito com o Paulo sobre isso, mas ele falou que ele vai escrever ainda um livro a respeito desses testes padronizados que vêm já prontos do governo para serem aplicados nas escolas americanas.
See. Shall we try the next question now? Is
Okay.
that good? Yes? Do you want to? Yes?
Okay.
Stephanie, por favor, pergunte ao professor Aira se acho que os 5 primeiros itens que ele traz dessa questão me parece que vai ao encontro de uma outra pergunta que tem da professora Delma Andrade, que também é mestranda do mestrado em Ciências Ambientais da nossa universidade. Ela fala como é que a relação, né, ou a possibilidade de refazer a cultura de suas vidas cotidianas. Então, esse movimento de refazer a cultura das vidas cotidianas está ligado a esses itens, possivelmente aos 5 itens das vidas negras importam, do papel da mulher, do empoderamento das pessoas na denúncia, enfim, só acho que são questões que ele traz nesses itens, que eu acho que a gente pode puxar nessa questão para complementar.
Qual professora, professor Maurício? Desculpa, qual que é o nome da professora?
Delma Andrade. Delma Andrade.
And Professor Aira, there is a question, and it's very similar to the previous question. So Professor Mauricio wants to put it together.
Yes.
With the previous question. So there is a teacher called Delma Andrade. And so she wants to know about the possibility to make the culture from people culture related to the first 5 items that you put about the weather station, related to the women rights, the weather station. She wants to relate the first 5 items to the possibility to make a culture, a people culture. She wants to put it together. So is it a possibility to make it?
Yes, absolutely. And many people are already doing this. So when we go to the theater, or when we listen to songs, or when we have community festivals, all these sites of popular culture and popular education are also involved with these same themes. So I discuss it from formal education inside a school or college. How could we educators do this? But outside formal education, very, very important that popular culture, popular education do the same. Can you please explain that? Thank you.
Okay. Ele fala que certamente é possível, né? E que dentro ele explicou, né, agora há pouco, como fazer isso dentro, né, da sala de aula numa educação formal, mas que fora da sala de aula, né, já existem pessoas trabalhando nisso, a respeito de uma educação mais popular, né, de uma educação voltada para o cotidiano das pessoas, que está totalmente relacionado a uma educação da vida cotidiana, né, do cotidiano das pessoas.
Yes.
Okay, so the next question.
Yes.
Is are the teachers up to high school level in the U.S. professionally respect enough? And did they get enough credit to their effort?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Deixa eu só traduzir. Let me translate the question because I made a question in English. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Então, a pergunta é se os professores, né, até o ensino médio nos Estados Unidos, eles são respeitados profissionalmente, né? E se eles são valorizados o suficiente pelo seu esforço. Okay.
For the most part, no.
Na maioria dos lugares, não.
For the most part, no. But we do not have one school system in America or most other societies. In where I live in the New York City in America, there are perhaps 6 or 7 school systems, depending on this. Is it urban? Is it suburban? Or is it rural? So first we talk about the geographic location. Urban, suburban, and rural schools, public schools, are very different from each other. Could you please say that to folks?
Primeiramente, ele quer explicar que nos Estados Unidos existem 6 ou 7 diferentes sistemas de escolas de educação. E esses sistemas eles estão divididos em escola urbana, escola suburbana e escola rural. Então, isso depende muito em qual tipo de sistema aquela escola está inserida para ele poder responder essa pergunta, se os professores estão sendo valorizados ou não. Então, depende do sistema em que a escola está inserida.
Next. Whether you are urban, suburban, or rural, are you teaching in a public school, a private religious school, or are you teaching in a charter school? So now, not only do we have geography, we also have different types of organization.
Como se não bastasse só estar diferentemente a questão geográfica, né, das escolas, se é suburbana, se é urbana, se é rural, ainda tem a questão da organização dessa escola, se ela é pública, se ela é privada, né, se ela é uma escola religiosa, né, por exemplo, escola católica, então tem toda essa questão também, além da questão geográfica.
Yes. High school teachers are treated well in wealthy public school districts and in expensive private schools. Those 2 places.
Ok. Os professores do ensino médio, no caso da high school, eles são bem tratados em escolas caras, por exemplo, né, escolas privadas são caras, ou escolas situadas em lugares melhores, digamos assim, né, socialmente falando.
Mm-hmm. And teachers in school districts for poor students are not treated well.
E os professores de periferia, eles não são, normalmente da periferia, eles não são bem tratados.
Yes. So, here's what we could say. The parents of students mostly like their school and their teachers in that school. That's what parents feel. Parents like the schools their children go to, no matter where it is, and they like also their teachers. So parents have a good opinion of teachers.
Os pais normalmente gostam muito das escolas, são muito amigáveis com os professores, gostam muito dos professores, independentemente de onde essas escolas estão localizadas, se é na periferia, se é em bairros mais pobres, ou se é uma escola privada ou católica. Os pais geralmente gostam muito das escolas, essa é a opinião dos pais e dos professores.
Yes. Teachers are underpaid and overworked in America, in general.
De uma forma geral, nos Estados Unidos, os professores eles são sobrecarregados com o trabalho, geralmente eles fazem hora extra, e são mal pagos.
2 years ago,
Há 2 anos atrás,
there were big teacher strikes in the country.
houve uma grande greve de professores no país.
It showed us how powerful teachers can be. No society can function without its school system.
Essa greve, ela nos mostrou quão poderosa pode ser a união dos professores e que nenhuma sociedade pode caminhar, pode continuar sem educação, sem os professores.
Again, no modern society can function without its teachers in schools every day.
Ele vai falar de novo que nenhuma escola pode funcionar sem os seus professores diariamente lá.
When teachers went on strike,
Quando os professores fizeram a greve,
the society shut down.
A sociedade se calou.
What should we do with our children? Where should they go?
O que nós faremos com os nossos filhos? Onde que a gente vai? Para onde que eles vão?
We have in America 55 million children in school.
Nos Estados Unidos, nós temos 55 milhões de crianças na escola.
If there are no schools, if teachers are on strike, where do those 55 million children go?
Se os professores estão em greve, para onde essas 55 milhões de crianças vão?
Most parents work, and they cannot go to work if their children cannot go to school.
A maioria dos pais trabalham e a maioria deles não pôde ir para o trabalho, porque as crianças não tinham como ir para a escola.
So, when teachers went on strike, the authorities tried very hard to get the teachers back in the classroom as soon as possible.
Então, quando os professores fizeram essa greve 2 anos atrás, as autoridades tentaram o mais rápido possível colocar os professores de volta em suas classes.
Teachers who go on strike have a great power they do not use too often enough.
A greve de professores é um poder que os professores às vezes não têm consciência de que eles têm, e eles não têm noção de quão grande pode ser essa força, esse poder que eles possuem.
Yes. So that is the problem. Our teacher unions here do not let the teachers go on strike.
Um grande problema é que a nossa união de professores, que seria como se fosse um sindicato aqui para nós no Brasil, ela não permite que os professores façam greve.
So this allows teachers to be underpaid and overworked.
E isso acaba permitindo que os professores sejam mal pagos e sobrecarregados de trabalho.
Yes. So could we try the next question, please?
Okay, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next question is from Juliana Locke. She's is an educator in a public school, and I'm going to read it in English. Then I'm going to translate in Portuguese. Okay.
Okay. Very good.
Before Trump age, the U.S. was in eight very democratic years. In Brazil, it happened from 2003 to 2015. So it means 12 democratic years. So in your opinion, Professor, where do we make wrong as educators to allow the return of an authoritarian government?
Yes.
I'm going to read it in Portuguese. Antes da era Trump, os Estados Unidos, eles tiveram 8 anos de democracia, 8 anos muito democráticos, né, que foi a era Obama. No Brasil, isso aconteceu de 2003 a 2015. Então, isso significa 12 anos de ensino mais democrático, de uma educação mais democrática. Na opinião do professor Ira, onde que nós erramos como professores para permitir o retorno de um governo autoritário? Tá? Essa é a pergunta.
Sim. There is a dispute in America about the Obama presidency when it comes to education.
Oh, sorry, Professor, can you repeat, please? I couldn't hear you very well.
Okay. We have to rethink the Obama presidency regarding education.
Ok. Nós pensamos que na era Obama, nós tivemos algum tipo de educação.
President Obama appointed a Secretary of Education who undermined public schools.
O presidente Obama, ele nomeou como secretária de educação uma pessoa que minou, né, a educação pública nos Estados Unidos.
We had, before Obama, very bad education policy. President Obama continued it.
Antes do presidente Obama, nós tivemos anos de uma educação péssima, no sistema de educação péssimo, e o presidente Obama só deu continuidade a esse sistema ruim de educação.
Before Obama, it was called No Child Left Behind from President Bush.
It's a system name. It's a no Child Left Behind. It's a kind of program name or something like that.
That's the name of the program. Yes.
Okay.
In the Bush administration before Obama.
Okay. Antes do presidente Obama, havia uma espécie de um programa que ele era chamado No Child Left Behind, que significa nenhuma criança deixada para trás, no governo Bush.
Obama continued that, but called it Race to the Top. Race to the Top, a new name, the same program.
O presidente Obama, ele continuou o mesmo programa, só que ele mudou o nome. Ele só mudou o nome de No Child Left Behind to Race to Top, corrida para o topo. Ele só transformou o nome, mas o programa continuou o mesmo.
In those years of President Obama, standardized tests went all over the public schools and took over curriculum and teaching.
Nesses anos do governo Obama, o presidente Obama, ele colocou em prática os testes padronizados, que são testes que vêm do núcleo, já são provas, né, testes que eles vêm prontos. Os professores, eles não têm acesso à elaboração dessas provas, elas vêm prontas já do núcleo. Então, o que ele fez? Ele instruiu, ele acabou consolidando essa prática dos testes padronizados, né, durante o seu governo, e limitando o poder do professor, né, e da educação desse professor em sala de aula.
Yes, see, Obama's policy favored privatization, funneling millions of dollars to private schools and charter schools.
O governo Obama, ele viabilizou a privatização de várias escolas públicas. Eles investiram bilhões de dólares na privatização de escolas públicas.
President Trump continued that.
E o presidente... Sorry.
No.
Presidente Trump, ele só deu continuidade a tudo isso.
This means now 20 years of very bad policy for public education.
Isso significa 20 anos de uma política muito ruim de educação nos Estados Unidos.
If teachers go on strike and demand more funding, more money for schools, no more standardized testing, smaller class size, and so on. They will be very important in solving the problems. Teachers can be very important, but they have to become on strike and militant and demand the government fully fund the schools.
Os professores, eles têm um grande poder, se eles fizerem greve, entrarem em greve, de ir contra esses testes padronizados, de buscar melhores condições de trabalho e uma educação, um sistema de educação melhor. Só que eles têm que, os professores têm que ser ativos e têm que ir atrás desses direitos que eles tanto precisam, tanto querem.
So we wonder now in America, will President Biden be different?
Nós estamos aqui pensando nos Estados Unidos se com o presidente Biden, se isso será diferente.
Many of us who are critical and progressive teachers are wondering who will Mr. Biden appoint as his education secretary.
Nós aqui, professores, críticos e liberais, a gente nós nos perguntamos quem o presidente Biden vai nomear como seu secretário de educação.
We are putting forth names of people who will be good for the public schools.
Sorry, are you pointing names?
No, we are discussing names. Who will be good for public schools?
Ok, thank you. Nós estamos discutindo alguns nomes, algumas pessoas, quem talvez seria bom para a educação nesse momento.
Yes. So we are not certain if he will listen to the progressive educators in America.
Nós estamos aqui pensando se nós seremos ouvidos. A educação progressista será ouvida nos Estados Unidos.
Overall, what's important for education is for teachers to unite with parents and with students to push for democratic change, because there are so many teachers, so many students, and so many parents who all want good schools. It's important they fight together with other groups in society.
É importante que os pais, os professores e os estudantes, eles lutem juntos para que essas mudanças possam ocorrer para uma educação melhor. Esse movimento tem que ser feito juntos, com os pais, os professores, os alunos e outras classes trabalhadoras do país.
So, if we join with parents, and if we join with the student movement, and if we join with all the other groups in society that want change, the people who want to fix the environment, the people who want higher wages, the people who want housing, affordable housing, the people who need medical care. If all of us join together, we will be a very powerful coalition.
Se nós, professores, nos juntarmos aos estudantes, aos pais e a outros grupos, outras classes que desejam mudanças no sentido de meio ambiente, no sentido ambiental, mudanças para uma saúde, o sistema de saúde melhor, para moradias, sistemas de moradias que sejam melhores. Se nós todos nos juntarmos, nós seremos um grupo poderosíssimo para lutar contra essas injustiças, contra essas questões sociais.
See, does someone have another question about this topic that they want to ask?
Alguma outra questão, professor Maurício, sobre esse assunto?
Stephanie, acho que a gente está estourando o nosso tempo, né? Aliás, já estouramos, né? Estamos aqui, a previsão inicial era 1h30, nós estamos 1h38. Aliás, de um agradável diálogo, né? De uma escuta muito interessante e importante. E eu acho que fazemos uma última questão, eu não sei se você tem aí, mas poderíamos juntar com outra que tem aqui, da professora Tanice, que está muito próximo do que o professor Aira vinha falando, do avanço, então, da privatização da educação.
Professor Maurício, essa questão está relacionada com a próxima aqui. Dá para a gente juntar, dá para fazer essa articulação aí. Uhum.
Legal, então. Então, você pode formula o professor, e aí a gente combina o seguinte, já combinamos com a Soraya também, que com essa questão nós fechamos o nosso encontro, e as questões não respondidas, né, como compromisso inicial, encaminhamos a ele, para que possa, então, ele fazer os seus comentários e nos retornar e, enfim, darmos continuidade a essa roda de conversa. Tá bom? E ao fim, né, nós, então, fazemos o encerramento após a resposta.
Professor Aira, so we have no time for all the questions we got, because there are so many questions now, but we are going to ask you one more question, the last one.
Thank
and
you.
After that, we'll finish, okay?
Okay, thank you.
The last one, right now, okay?
Okay.
So the question is from Kelly Mendes. She's a history teacher in a public school. So the question is, what kind of consequences do you realize that are related to education as a neoliberal government rise in the world, especially in Brazil and in the US? I'm going to translate that in Portuguese, okay?
Okay.
To Português. Que tipo de consequências, quais consequências o professor Aira, ele percebe que estão relacionadas à educação com o avanço do governo neoliberal no mundo, né? Especialmente no Brasil e nos Estados Unidos.
Uhum.
Só complementando, e aí há espaço para uma educação libertadora?
Okay. So Professor Mauricio wants to know if there is space, any space for a liberal education in the context in a new liberal government, for example. Is there any space for a critical education?
Mm-hmm. Yes. For 50 years now, neoliberalism has been conquering the entire world.
De 50 anos para cá, até hoje, o neoliberalismo ele vem tomando o mundo.
In each society, neoliberalism has been conquering all sectors of society. Inside education.
Em cada sociedade, ele vem tomando conta de várias áreas da sociedade, vários aspectos dessa sociedade.
What economists tell us, what political economists tell us, please say that.
Sorry, can you repeat, please?
What economists tell us is that there are many subsectors of the economy.
Okay. Okay. I got it. Que vários subsetores da economia.
The most important are these four. These four subsectors of the economy have the most power in society. That's production, communications. The second, let me get my list.
O setor.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
These four sectors are the most powerful: transportation, communication, production, and finance. Those are the four most powerful sectors of any society: transportation, communication, production, and finance.
São quatro subsetores da economia que são os mais poderosos de todos: é o relacionado a transporte, produção, comunicação, não, perdão, tem uma ordem, né? Transporte, comunicação, produção e finanças.
See, there are other sectors. For example, education is a huge subsector of society.
A educação, por exemplo, é um setor enorme da sociedade. A educação ela é colocada como um subsetor.
Recreation is another important, very large sector of society.
Recreação também é um grande subsetor, por exemplo.
Neoliberalism is being enforced across all of them.
O neoliberalismo ele vem forçando todos esses setores, eles vêm empurrando todos esses setores da economia.
Neoliberalism is a domination of the marketplace over all aspects of society.
O neoliberalismo ele vem dominando todos os mercados econômicos da sociedade.
It means austerity first and most of all, austerity.
Austerity?
Yes, that's austerity means budget cuts.
Okay.
All your budget will be cut. It also means what we call speed up. You must work faster and harder at work. It also means what we call contingency labor. We don't hire full-time people. We prefer part-time people without health care or without vacation. So austerity means the material conditions of work and life are being cut back. School budget.
Ok, agora. E o neoliberalismo ele vem colocando as pessoas, o trabalho das pessoas como algo material. Ele não está preocupado se as pessoas estão sendo bem pagas ou não. Então eles preferem pegar o trabalhador e trabalhar e registrar, no caso, ele como meio período para não ter que pagar os direitos, não ter que pagar plano de saúde, não ter que pagar vale alimentação. Então ele prefere pegar 2 trabalhadores para trabalhar meio período do que um trabalhador para trabalhar o período todo. Então é assim que funciona.
See. In education, here is what it means particularly.
Em educação é o que isso está particularmente ali, o neoliberalismo está ali tentando fazer.
Larger classes, more students per class.
Salas de aulas maiores e mais alunos por classe. Então, quanto maior a sala de aula, mais alunos, mais estudantes. Então, é isso que eles estão tentando fazer. Salas de aulas maiores com muito mais estudantes.
Fewer services. So, in America, most schools do not have school nurses. Some do not have school librarians. Some do not have school psychologists. So that these services are cut from the budget. That's austerity.
E nos Estados Unidos, muitas das escolas não têm mais enfermeiras, não têm mais bibliotecas ou bibliotecários, e não tem psicólogos. Então, são coisas que são profissionais que estão sendo cortados nas escolas americanas.
Fewer computers are available for students in school. And there are more part-time teachers instead of full-time teachers, and the curriculum is standardized. That is, we buy one curriculum for the entire grade, and we teach it piece by piece, and then we test students on a computer to see if they learned. That's a much cheaper way.
From the Common Core?
Yes, exactly. Right.
Okay. E aí nas nossas escolas, o que acontece é que eles estão contratando os professores para trabalhar, vários professores para trabalhar meio período, para evitar que tenham que pagar esses benefícios. E aí vem o currículo já pronto do núcleo comum, né, que é o sistema que gere todo ali a questão da educação. E aí eles fazem as provas todas no computador, já vem essas provas padronizadas, junto com os conteúdos, junto com o currículo padronizado, e os estudantes fazem essas provas num computador já. Essas provas já vêm prontas do núcleo, e esse conteúdo é separado peça por peça, onde os estudantes estudam determinado conteúdo, fazem uma prova, estudam determinado conteúdo, fazem uma prova já no computador.
Under neoliberal policy, all the money not spent on schools, on public hospitals, on public parks, on public housing, on public public transport trains, all the money taken away from these public services is transferred to the private sector.
E aí, no sistema neoliberal, todo esse dinheiro que seria voltado para a escola pública, transporte público, moradia pública, está tudo sendo transferido para a educação privada, para o transporte privado. Então, as empresas privatizam, né, esses setores, e aí todo esse dinheiro que seria gasto na educação pública, ele está sendo transferido para os setores privados, por conta da privatização.
In the United States, the rich have never been richer.
Nos Estados Unidos, sorry, do you mean rich enough? I mean,
people, like the 1%, the top people in in income have never been this rich. There has never been so much wealth in America than there is right now.
Ok. Ele quer dizer, ele está falando que as pessoas ricas, né, as pessoas que já são ricas, nunca foram tão ricas como elas estão sendo agora nos Estados Unidos, por conta desses sistemas de privatização.
For 50 years, the 1%, the richest people in society have been transferring all the wealth to themselves. So we have less money for schools, less money for public parks, less money for housing, less money for public health, and so on. And all the money that should go there is going into private hands and enriching fewer and fewer people at the expense of the majority and the public schools.
E aí todo o dinheiro que deveria ser gasto na educação pública, para lazer, né, no caso público, ele está indo para as mãos dessas pessoas que administram o setor privado, fazendo com que elas fiquem cada vez mais ricas, e no caso, tornando esses serviços piores, no caso.
So, all families who have some money must now pay for all these good things out of their own income. The public sector does not provide these goods and services. Can you tell? You see that now we families must now pay for private doctors, private health spas, private tutors, private camps, private swimming instruction. None of this can be found in the public sector. All of that has been cut. So now we have to support it by buying it in the private sector if we can afford it.
Então, todos os benefícios que antigamente as famílias tinham, né, de dentista, né, público, serviço público de odontologia, serviço público médico, por exemplo, uma academia, algo que antigamente era do setor público, agora essas famílias têm que pagar por isso, elas têm que pagar por um tratamento odontológico, têm que pagar por um tratamento médico, se elas querem, por exemplo, ir numa academia, elas têm que pagar por por esses benefícios que antigamente eram gratuitos. E assim, elas pagam e se tem condições de pagar, porque muitas das famílias não têm condições de custear esses serviços, esses benefícios, no caso.
See? So, at this moment, for teachers and students and families, there is no more important problem than economic inequality.
Nesse momento, para estudantes, professores e famílias, não há um assunto mais importante do que a economia.
There is enough wealth in society to keep all children well fed and all families in houses.
Sorry, can you repeat, please, Professor?
Our society is rich enough to feed all its children. There is no need for hungry children or for homeless children in society. We are rich enough.
Ok.
And that, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Nós já estamos ricos o suficiente, não tem necessidade de haver crianças pobres ou crianças passando fome, porque a sociedade americana já está rica o suficiente.
So we teachers, with the parents of our students, must solve these problems in the next 10 years. This is our challenge for the next decade, to make society, this is what Paulo Freire wanted, a world less cruel and less violent and more just. And that remains our agenda.
O desafio para os próximos 10 anos seria para a sociedade americana tornar uma sociedade mais humana. O que Paulo Freire, né, desejava era que houvesse uma sociedade menos cruel e mais humana. Então, ele coloca como um desafio para os próximos 10 anos, os pais, os professores, os alunos, os estudantes deveriam lutar em prol dessa sociedade mais humanizada.
See. And I will end here. Is that okay?
E ele quer terminar por aqui, tudo bem?
See?
Sim, sim. Professor Aira, muitíssimo obrigado pela sua generosidade, pela sua capacidade de diálogo. Com certeza nos encantávamos muito pela sua obra e nos encantamos agora pela sua fala.
Professor Ira, we are so glad to hear you.
Okay.
And when we read your book, we felt so glad about we read, and now we are glad about what we hear from you. So
thank you. Yes, please tell Professor Mauricio, I will send answers to the remaining questions to you in an email, so you can forward them to the other people. Please tell him that.
Oh, of course. O professor Maurício, ele falou que o professor Aira disse que as perguntas que não foram respondidas, que é para mandar para o e-mail dele, e aí ele faz questão de responder todas elas.
Ok. Muito obrigado.
Muito
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Professor Aira.
Thank you very
então,
much.
Uma boa noite a todos e todas. Obrigado a todos que nos acompanharam, né, via YouTube, professores, colegas do programa de pós-graduação, e temos certeza de que os momentos são de enfrentamento, são de desafios, né, são de ousadia. E é nessa caminhada, e é nessa batida que esse debate nos suscita e que nós vamos continuar caminhando. Muito obrigado e boa noite a todos e todas.
Obrigado. Thank you. Thank you so much.